Hey everybody, and welcome back to coverage of the StarCityGames.com Legacy Open Series here in New Orleans. I'm Joey Pasco, and I'm joined by Michael Shelkofsky, who brought a pretty interesting stock list he's to the tournament today.
I believe so.
That sounds like a strange thing to say, but I guess just tell us about what you brought,
all right,
and maybe slow roll them on the surprise.
So for the past few weeks after Atlanta, I've been playing High Tide, and I've really been enjoying it, and I wanted to do a little bit different, a little bit of innovation on my own. And unfortunately, last week, High Tide won the event, I believe. And so I was like, oh man, this kind of sucks. I don't want to play the same list. So I did bring something a little different that I've been trying to test, and that is Epic Experiment. And so far, it's been pretty epic. So
so basically, as you were talking about a few minutes ago, you took High Tide. It's pretty much a stock list.
Yep.
You cut a few cards, you cut like a turnabout, moved it to the sideboard.
Yeah, the turnabout on the sideboard is so you can, obviously wish where you get the extra copies.
Right, and then you managed to fit in 2 copies of Epic Experiment. So what about Epic Experiment? What was it about that card that made you feel like this fits in here and this is going to be good?
The deck relies very heavily on Time Spiral to gain massive amount of advantage. Like a lot of the cards are actually just card disadvantage. Things like the High Tide itself actually just doesn't do anything. The Cunning Wish is a 1-for-1, but it's expensive.
Right.
So you have to have the Time Spiral to really keep up the cantrips and things like that to keep comboing off. And the Epic Experiment was a supplement to that. So it's kind of like Time Spiral number 5 and 6, except it's a completely different card.
Sure.
And when it resolves, the game just is basically over. Whereas when Time Spiral, your opponent gets to refill their hand and draw counter spells, things like that. So you actually have to have a force battle, again, to keep going. Whereas if you resolve Epic Experiment for anything, most of the time 6 will pretty much win you the game.
Yeah.
Anything more than 6 is almost guaranteed.
So actually, tell us about how any interesting stories you might have resolving Epic Experiment.
I would love to, except my opponent's all scooped. I Epic Experiment at one time for 6 and didn't continue to combo off.
Okay.
However, the cards I drew were things like Brainstorm, Meditate, and stuff like that. So I technically whiffed on the Epic Experiment, but I ended the turn with 9 cards in my hand.
Right. So it allowed you.
Yeah. So I killed my
win.
opponent the next turn.
Right.
I did Epic Experiment earlier for 16. We had a slight rules question, whereas I had a Time Spiral obviously for 16, and we weren't sure whether or not the cards I don't cast from Epic Experiment get shuffled in when I cast a Time Spiral.
Right.
And about 5 judges later, I think we decided that the cards would be shuffled into the deck. And I believe was what the ruling was, but my opponent scooped. So I didn't get to finish my other 12 spells or whatever it was that I wanted to Epic Experiment.
So you got the win, but not the satisfaction.
Exactly. That's what I've been all day. I'll cast it, I'll win, but there will be so many spells that I want to cast. There's just so much value there.
So one thing that I noticed about the list, the way that you are casting the Epic Experiment is off of just one source
volcanic
in
island.
the entire deck, and that seems like, to me, I'm going, that's so shaky. A Wasteland makes the Epic Experiment into a dead card, right? So
what it is you only need 1 red mana.
Sure.
So I only have to tap this card once. And even when you have a High Tide, if you have multiple High Tides, you can tap it for a red and it still produces multiple blue.
Right.
Just how the rules work. So I typically fetch the Volcanic Island when I'm casting Epic Experiment there. Like my first fetch land, I never get Volcanic Island just because of that reason. Like one of the strengths of this deck is it's nearly Wasteland proof.
Right, exactly.
So typically I don't go get Volcanic Island. However, if something happens, like actually earlier today, my opponent played Wasteland. He was like, Wasteland Bob. And I was like, yeah, man, you got Bob. In your turn, because I was actually about to do something, I went and got the Volcanic Island. And he was like, oh, well, at the end of your turn, I'm going to Wasteland. And I was like, oh. Yeah, there's your Wasteland. Yeah, you got me.
Yeah.
And in that situation, you just always pitch it to force.
Yeah.
If it's dead, then you just pitch it.
Yeah. Do you think it might be a good idea to maybe just run a second one just to prevent
That's what I was hoping to learn this weekend. And that might be the right number just to do that. But because you can always pitch it to force, and you're almost happy to pitch it to force, because then the card disadvantage just doesn't hurt you that much when you're pitching Brainstorms and stuff like that. You really feel that. Whereas when you pitch excess ones or ones you can't cast, things like that, it's not that bad. So two might be where the list goes if this does catch on. But if lists from nowadays, play just one, I completely understand it.
So I guess tell us about the sideboard. You said it is kind of a wish board.
So yeah, so you do have a wish board. Outside of the Leyline Sanctity, you can get any card you need, and honestly, I didn't feel like having 15 instants was necessary. Basically, any of the problem cards being Ethersworn Canoness and things like that, you have the Echoing Truth, the Wipe Away, and the Capsize to deal with. Against your combo players and things like that, you have your Flusterstorm. If you're trying to protect your combo, you have the extra path in the side and the extra force.
Right.
To keep comboing off, you have your Blue Sun, your Meditate, and your Turnabout. And the win condition is also Blue Sun with the Brain Freeze. Ravenous Trap is just a head against Dredge. It's one of the most powerful decks out there. But the Leyline, basically the worst matchup in this deck is the bug type decks. Anything that plays Thoughtseize, Hymn to Turok, Inquisition, the decks that just rip your hand apart, those were pretty much the worst matchup. I figured the Ravenous Trap would give me enough edge against Dredge that if I could just slow them down, I could combo out and kill them. Whereas the other decks, I felt like I needed a way to answer their pinpoint discard, and that's how I came with Leyline.
Okay. What did you end up losing to today?
Mainly variants. A lot of my things were like I would have all the High Tides, all the cards, but I wouldn't have Time Spiral. I would have all the Time Spirals. I wouldn't have the High Tides, or I would like combo off. I Blue Sun for 6 at one point, drew 5 lands and a spell.
Oh wow, yeah.
So that basically summed up my weekend. But of the interactive games and things like that I lost, Esper Stoneblade is a very tough matchup because they have so much interactivity that's just bad for you. It's really hard to sculpt a hand, and if they resolve something like Jace or something like that, the game can just end before you can even beat them.
Yeah, they've got a lot of the counter spell disruption, the discard with like Inquisition of Kozilek and things like that. So
the Rug Delver, I'm about 50-50. Some hands they just have the typical like God hand from Delver, and it's just really hard to beat. Like anything backed up with like Spell Pierce, Force of Will, and things like that. Flusterstorm with any kind of clock, it is a rough deck. But for the most part, I've just gone off, and they couldn't stop. They couldn't outforce me or something like that. Pact of Negation is one of the best cards against the deck because you're not losing the card disadvantage like they are to force.
Right.
So I really like the Pact in the deck, but of the top tier decks, things like Reanimator and stuff like that, you have enough disruption, enough hate that the deck is very viable, and I don't know about weak matchups other than Bug, actually.
Okay. So at this point, you feel like no changes, maybe another Volcanic Island, but in your opinion, you're good? Maybe.
I'm going to have to tweak some numbers around. One card that I was never quite happy with was Meditate.
Okay.
I understand its role in the deck and how it fills up your hand, but skipping your turn was pretty bad in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know of a card that I can get that much value that is cheap and efficient in this deck. The cantrips that you're fine cantripping things like that, but if you're not actually gaining card advantage to pitch the things like Force and stuff like that, or to make up for cards like High Tide, then the other counterspell decks and the other discard decks can just get ahead of you, and it's really hard to come back.
Yeah, so it seems like Meditate, like a lot of times you're hoping to never get to that next turn that you need to skip anyway, but I understand.
Yeah, when you meditate and kill them in the same turn, that's fine. But when you're still trying to sculpt the hand and you just need that little extra, those few extra cards, Meditate's like the worst card because it costs so much mana in the deck. So it's almost your entire turn.
Cool. Well, yeah. Anything else you wanted to add about
the only thing I might do was maybe an extra Candelabra. Okay. But I'll have to test some more and hopefully have people not scoop when I cast Epic Experiment.
Yeah, to see how it actually resolves.
Yes.
Right.
Maybe we'll learn what the card does. I still don't know.
Well, excellent. I think it's a very interesting choice. I already love High Tide as a deck. I think it's a very interesting kind of deck to play. A lot of math, a lot of thinking, a lot of trains of thought, and then adding Epic Experiment just seems like just an extra exciting punch to the deck.
It is exciting.
It's very cool.
I'm pretty sure I had more people around my games than most like the feature matches and things like that today. Like everybody was getting a kick out every time I cast it.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks again for the deck tech, and good luck in whatever tournaments you happen to bring it to in the future.
Everyone.
Star City or whatever. So.
Everyone. Well, thanks.
Cool. Thanks. For SCG Live, I'm Joey Pasco with Michael Shelkofsky, and we'll see you soon.